Please be seated. for the ALAC or at large, actually. I think it's a question of who you think would best serve your needs.
Yeah, so that is still. So we're about 5 minutes behind.
All the sessions were late.
Yeah, all the sessions are late. I think we have a very young participant also.
It's so cute. Thank you. Thank you very much.
So, ladies and gentlemen, we'll be starting in a few seconds. Apologies for the 5-minute delay so far. That's because this is Asia Pacific. We are far away from.
They're all on the internet.
Yes.
They're all on the internet.
One second, I'll close this. So let's get started. My name is Satish Babu. I'm a volunteer with AP Relo, which is part of the ICANN at large community. And welcome to this workshop. At the outset, I'd like to very briefly go over the objectives of this workshop and the format that we will be adopting. We hope to be having some more participants who I think they will be trickling in as we move forward. This workshop is titled Asia and the Next Billion, Challenges in Digital Inclusion. Now, most of us here are from the Asia Pacific, some of us are not. Working in the Asian, Australian, and Pacific Islands Regional at Large Organization, which is the full form of AP Relo. We are very much conscious of the fact that Asia Pacific is a very diverse region. It's geographically a very large region. It's got about 60+% of the world's population, and also a similar population of the internet users who are presently the present counts indicate. This also means that the next billion who are going to join the internet is also likely to be in the majority from this region. For instance, India has about 400 million users, or slightly over 400 million, at about 30% or less penetration. So if India itself is going to do about 90%, then we're going to talk about 1 billion from India itself. So, and combining with China, we certainly are going to be about 60% of the next billion. Now that is where the root of this workshop arises from, because we would like to discuss some of the challenges as we go forth to the inclusion of this new billion coming in, or the majority of which are from the Asia Pacific. Now, apart from the diversity and the size and so on, there are also other challenges, which are things like the fact that these users who are coming in now are poor people in the large, in the majority, who are new to computers. Their mobile phone is the first computer that they will ever use or they are using. So there is this question of the new digital divides. We are familiar with the old digital divide, which is all about access. The new digital divide is perhaps not about access, because everybody will have some kind of access. It is more about the meaningful and equitable use of the internet in doing whatever people want to do with it. This meaningful access is presently kind of conditioned by the digital divides of, say, bandwidth. Some people are bandwidth privileged, others challenged, or computing devices or languages. There's a whole bunch of things that we need to talk about. So these challenges is at the heart of this workshop. Plus, there are also some mitigating factors, like a lot of youth in these countries, and they are, they adopt these technologies very easily. And education is coming up. The prices of connectivity access is dropping. These are some of the positives, perhaps. So this workshop is to discuss the challenges of these kinds in the context of Asia Pacific. And the format of this workshop, which I'll be introducing right now, is as follows. Rinalia is going to talk to us about the 4 categories, 4 themes that we have identified. This is a breakout group session. We have a limitation in terms of the number of groups that can be accommodated here. But we have to live with that and see how to kind of organize ourselves. We start with an intro, which is right now what I'm doing, and then introduction to the topics, which Rinalia, we will not be introducing anybody in person because introductions are all available online. So Rinalia will be talking to us about the 4 categories of topics. Then we have a 30-minute breakout discussion, followed by, now we have identified chairs for these groups, these 4 groups, and they'll be then making a presentation of the summary of these discussions. And that will be followed by about 25 minutes of open discussions. We will be calling upon a few people specifically during these open discussions, and the rest will be open to the floor. And finally, closing will be about for 3 to 4 minutes. And the total time expected is about 90 minutes for this workshop. So with that, we're kind of slightly delayed. So I will now request Rinalia to take over the introduction of the themes.
Thank you, Satish. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here and to be with you to discuss this very important topic for the Asia-Pacific region. My name is Rinalia Abdurrahim, and Satish has asked me to help him set the context for the discussion. I'll just start at the macro level as a beginning. I think we know that there is an estimated 7.4 billion people in the world today, and 46% have access to the internet. The rest do not. So more than half of the world population don't have access to the internet at all. And the organizations that study connectivity at the global level, they profile the people who don't typically have access, who are disconnected. And these are people who are typically female, the elderly, they are less educated, they belong in lower income groups, and they live in rural areas. As we talk about the next billion coming primarily from the Asia-Pacific region, I don't think it's likely that the profile would veer very much away from that which has been discussed. And there may be some additions, but I think by and large it's generally on target. In the Asia-Pacific region, there is a lot of excitement and dynamism about the internet. Whenever you travel in the region itself, you can see networks being promoted, cellular mobile phones, etc. And people are very excited, and young people are very eager to get connected and to do social media. And as Satish mentioned earlier, it's expected that the majority of the next billion of new users will come from large countries in East Asia and South Asia. But I think we can also expect that some of the new users will come from small communities, from small island nations as well, provided that infrastructure is available. Now, there are lots of efforts that are underway to bring the next billion of new users online, but there are still gaps. And that's why we are here today to discuss, because I think that addressing those gaps will be helpful to supplement the efforts that are underway. And I think that there needs to be a lot more support for community action to ensure equitable inclusion. The Asia-Pacific region, as you know, is extremely diverse, and this presents a very special challenge in enabling digital inclusion itself. There is the diversity of terrain. There's some very difficult ones ranging from deserts to mountains to small islands. There is also the very special diversity of languages and script. In India, there's officially 22 languages with 200 dialects alone. In other countries, there are others, probably not as many, but that's just an indication of what the challenges are. And there are also large rural populations, which make them very hard to reach. And there are also special challenges of reaching out to marginalized communities that include indigenous communities as well as people with disabilities. And we talk about problems with providing equal access to education. Not everyone has it in the region. There are also other social issues and gender issues. Of paramount concern, where access is poor and inadequate infrastructure. And this concern is actually across the board in every country that I've encountered in the region itself. No matter how developed it is, they're always concerned about the quality of broadband or cellular networks. And for people who study connectivity, they always zone in on the trinity of core factors that result in lack of access: affordability, digital literacy, and local content or services. And they don't often talk about infrastructure in the same breath in terms of these topics. And I think it's really quite important, because without adequate infrastructure, none of the others would matter, and you wouldn't be able to reach anyone anyway. So there are many elements to address to support digital inclusion of the next billion. And with many tracks to address the problem itself, policy coherence for impact becomes really, really important. And I think that's one of the topics that the breakout groups will discuss, in addition to infrastructure and economic issues, which I think will touch on affordability. The other track will also discuss social issues, technological issues, and then the policy coherence that I talked about before. I won't take up too much of our time because we started a little bit late anyway, and I look forward to the discussion across the 4 themes, where the participants of this workshop will share experiences from your own country, from the region, and will propose a set of strategies to address digital inclusion in the Asia-Pacific region. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Runalia. We will now go ahead with the breakout group discussions for about 35 minutes. We have identified 4 chairs who will guide the discussions of the breakout discussions and also present the summary of findings back at the big group here. We have on the infrastructure and economics issues, we have Professor Peng Hua, who's right here. No, yep. So you have to decide where you want to sit, because we have to, cluster around. Maybe here. So group 1's here. Group 2 is social issues. Anya. There Anya is. So would you like to be somewhere there? There, okay, right there. On technology issues, we have Professor K. Spark, who's right here. So would you like to sit right here?
Yeah, we'll cluster around here.
Right.
By the way, I'm not technical at all, so don't think that there's any prerequisite for technical knowledge.
Right. And for policy issues, Noel, are you here? I don't see Noel here. So what are you going to be here, Runali, or are you going to move? Yeah, okay. Runali has to leave. So are there any volunteers for chairing the policy issues track? Rajesh? Okay, Rajesh here will chair the, so you will have to then sit somewhere that side. So please feel free, once again, to repeat. We have the infrastructure and economics. Professor Peng Hua will be coordinating that. Social issues, Anya, and it's going to be there. Technology issues, Professor Park is going to be right here. And policy is going to be Rajesh, and it's going to be somewhere that side. Please break up into these groups.
35 minutes.
Yeah, 35 minutes is the time that you have. Can you read it out then?
Yeah, I can read it. I just have a question. What is QoS?
Quality of service.
Okay,
Serious concern that you I have no idea what it's about.
penetration, there's the rating level is like as a digital responsibility. But there is, he has also part of quality services. I'm not sure about this. Should I read that down?
You can skip it, no problem. That one line you can skip. The rest you can read. We have 5 minutes more to wind up the group discussion.
Mama.
Okay, can we get back, please? Okay, let us start with the presentations of the group chairs. We have 4 minutes per group chair for presentations, after which we'll open up the floor, and any remaining comments from group members can be kind of raised at the open discussions. So we move now to Group A, the infrastructure and economics issues. Professor Penghua.
Okay, I'm told there's a prize for finishing on time, so I'm going to try and win a prize. There's this very small group discussing infrastructure and economics because the sense was that my face was there, and also because the sense that the group issue will be resolved soon enough. Connectivity costs are falling. We were trying to think what cost will be rising, and we couldn't think of a cost that was rising. There is, however, a gap between urban and rural still. So that's one issue that countries that have a major rural population will face. Countries with physical difficulties in access, mountainous areas or Pacific islands, and islands would have some issues of connectivity. But the sense is that because your costs of connectivity is falling, eventually this problem will go away. There is some issue, however, like roaming when traveling, but as some of us pointed out, if you have money to travel, roaming isn't really a major issue then. There is, however, an issue moving from physical access to content access, meaning issue of language and the kind of content that will be available because of your language. Finally, we talked about a little bit about free basics and how net neutrality kind of issue, what they call zero rating, and there's some movement on that. Different countries have different responses, but again, it's part of the whole issue about connectivity costs are falling. Yeah. So on that note, yeah, I'm finishing my presentation.
Thank you. We now move on to Anya for the social issues.
Thank you, Satish. We have a fairly long list, I think, not surprisingly. We immediately ended up putting on the table, I think, two very big issues that aren't sufficiently addressed in these conversations in international meetings. The first one being education, the fact that large sections of our population still don't have education, especially for lower socioeconomic classes. That's a real issue. We're not talking about digital literacy, we are talking here about general literacy. The second was poverty. It was pointed out that in our region there's a very high Gini ration, so that there is a small segment of extremely rich people and large sections of very poor people. And that means that for those people, devices remain often out of reach because they are simply too expensive. So education and poverty are really two big issues that we need to continue to grapple with. Then further on to more nuanced social barriers, perhaps. First of all, people with disabilities are often still hidden away. Their needs aren't sufficiently addressed. We don't see enough responsive design, etc., not even in government websites or educational websites. For many people, feature phones are the only ones that are affordable, but it's smartphones and especially the Android ecosystem that actually has some accessibility features built in. So this really should be expanded. There were many issues around the content also. The fact that IDNs might now work at the top level domain, but for example, for email, there is still often a lack of interoperability, and this is really still a barrier. That so much content remains in English, is not enough in local dialects. We also talked, though, about the challenge of the big monopolies online, that actually in terms of the platforms that we use to access the internet, there is a narrowing down. And that it's not really unlikely that in a way that also narrows down the kind of content we access. So we all use Google and Facebook, and they are big enough to buy up even promising local startups that develop. We discussed a range of patriarchal issues that restrict women in particular to access the internet. We also talked about the fact that sometimes, even though our discourses around those issues might be well-intended, they might end up strengthening that. For example, the way online harassment is addressed, with a lot of emphasis on safety and the measures women themselves need to take, actually ends up a little bit being this, but what were you wearing? And also reinforcing a patriarchal structure in which women become responsible for this behavior and so shouldn't actually be online. We talked about the challenges of communicating effectively the benefits of the internet to people who have never explored that ecosystem themselves. There is too much of a focus on the tool rather than the impact. On the other hand, there is also a risk, especially with certain populations, to really emphasize only an instrumental use of the internet. So let's say for economic empowerment. Well, what we often see, actually, it's through entertainment and through exploring for joy and fun that people learn how the internet works without necessarily having to be given any digital literacy courses. And then the final 2 points, we also discussed that there is a policy dimension to the social barriers as well. An example that was given was, what is the point of accessing the latest or buying the latest device if you can't access, for example, platforms like YouTube? For older users, they might find a way to plugins that make that possible. But for newcomers, those kind of bans can actually be a restriction on exploration. In the context of India, we saw there was a geospatial bill introduced as a draft, which would actually make localization of apps almost impossible. And for disabled communities in the country, that was a really big issue because those location-based apps have been crucial to increasing their independence in how they are able to move around. So if that bill would actually have become an act, that would have been a real harm for them. And then finally, we also discussed about the fact that there being so much emphasis on using technology to streamline, say, government services leads to digital exclusion and harms of digital exclusion which aren't sufficiently taken into account for people who don't have readily access to technology at home, but who will need to travel to actually be able to then access those services. Or in remote populations, for example, in Vanuatu, very remote communities where it isn't always clear what kind of benefit could we really suggest for them to start using the internet that would make sense to those communities in their local context. So, and thank you to everybody in the group.
Thanks very much, Anya. We now move on to the third group, which is technology issues, and we have Professor K. Spark.
Thanks to the presence of a gentleman from Afghanistan, we ended up using Afghanistan as cases of. All right. Well, thanks to the presence of a gentleman from Afghanistan, we ended up using Afghanistan as a case study for our discussion. To state the conclusion first, there are several technologies that are available that can relatively quickly connect people in the rural areas, which is the challenge for the country. But we need some policy solution to push the network operators into actually implementing those solutions. So for mountainous areas, we realized that wireless is a better idea than building fiber optic door to door. And then we talked about using TV white space, for which patent has been already made available into public domain, at least for long-haul connections. And then you can build a smaller Wi-Fi area after making the long-haul connections through TV white space. And also a universal access service fund can be used to purchase or subsidize purchase of terminal devices once the long-haul connections are set up. So that's, I mean, we didn't have time to talk about other technologies, but that was one kind of customized technological solution that we thought of for Afghanistan. And then we talked about how free basics is actually being encouraged by the Afghanistan government and is pretty popular among people. But that itself cannot be a solution because Facebook, not just the problem of the fake news being exchanged over Facebook, but because of the general problem that we should not depend on Facebook as the surrogate for the internet. And another problem with depending on zero rating to expand access is that even to implement zero rating, you need to have a physical access. You need to have physical cell towers set up. So that in itself is something that should be done before we talk about zero rating. So we talked about how to achieve that, and of course we talked about how the network operators are not, although even when they are in competition with one another, they don't compete to go into rural areas where the profit margins do not justify the operating cost. So we try to make comparison to the the U.S. federal mail system, where the postal service were forced to go into rural areas to deliver mail, even losing money. And we can talk about government mandate for forcing network operators to go into rural areas and back them up with the subsidies in case the operating costs are not justified by the revenues coming in. So again, going back to the conclusion that I stated earlier, technologies are there. It's just providing right incentives and policies for the network operators to implement them.
Thank you, KS. We'll now move on to the last group. Rajesh will make the presentation on policy issues.
Our subject line is Asia and the next billion challenges. And what I feel, and not me, my group member, Maiko Nagakaki, Arjun, and Sienna, felt that the main reason of very slow proliferation of the internet into any, I will say, underdeveloped or developing country is not any other thing like no doubtly the technical things and all other things are there, but the policy is the major key issue. Friendly policies are not there. I can see just now into this hall or even the interest of policy towards policy is very low. That's why we were only 4 discussing about the policy. And that's the major issue, that we are not so participative into the policy discussion. And few of the bureaucrats of every government makes the policy into their own thought process, and they feel that whatsoever we are thinking is right for the community. First of all those bureaucrats are not a technical person. They are the administrative person. So the problem, technology and the policy don't go together. Technology advanced in a faster speed, I will say the bullet train like speed, and the policy remains over there where the policy was being drafted. They don't want to spend more thoughts on the policy. That's why they use the very basic theory of cut, copy, paste of earlier policy. That's the best example in India is going on. We are coming out with the new licenses. The first page of the license is as per the thoughts that we have to liberalize the internet, we have to expand the horizon of broadband. But then the second to last page of the where the policy is coming, they are just taking the earlier policy what they have drafted. And that's the major problem. Secondly, our government is also announced we are the multi-stakeholder, but never when the policy is being drafted, the bottom-up approach or the bottom of the pyramid approach is being taken. That's only, you can say, a definition words which we use in every speech that we are the multi-stakeholder and we take the bottom-up approach for every policy. Anya, you have rightly pointed out, blocking issue is the biggest issue in the country. For the very small thing, this blocking section 69C, if I'm right, section 69 is being 69A is very easily referred for blocking of any website, whether it's connected or not connected. The same is with the John Doe order. Anybody who are not connected with that content are taking the John Doe order and taking every ISP or service provider into the task. What we in the group decided, why not when we are talking that the internet is having no boundaries, then at least the basic policy for all over the economies should be the common. okay, in the group, the differences has come that 4 or 5 countries may raise the issue of not having the basic policy because they are thinking otherwise. But still, some of the policies are there which is friendly to the user, should be adopted by all the economies in the equal objective. But at the same time, every economy has got the difference of cultural and the social responsibility. They can think of that also while making the policy for the users, so that the billion we are talking, the next billion should come from all over the world, not from the Asian Pacific. Right now we are talking of the Asian Pacific. So these are the things. The policy should be users for the users' benefit. This was also discussed. And actually the multi-stakeholder approach should be adopted, and the government should there for the governance, not for the businessmen.
Thank you very much, Rajesh. So we have heard from all the groups. Before we open up the floor for discussions, there are a few special interventions that we have asked for. The first is from Nepal. We have Srideep, who has sent in an intervention, and Lina will read it now.
Yes. Am I audible? Yeah. We have notes received as a remote participant from Srideep Rayamaji from Nepal. As we are moving towards the next billion is coming from Asia and Africa. If you look at the current internet penetration rate, most of the developed nations have more than 80 to 90%, whereas if you look at the developing countries, it's rapidly increasing. But sad part is the technology is growing, but not the awareness. Nepal's population is around 28 million. Internet penetration rate is around 70.2%, where we are struggling in concept of internet governance and multi-stakeholder concept. There is a huge lack of capacity building and communication of IG process, not just in political leadership, but even in ICT policymaker. Multi-stakeholder is just a choice of picked specific people from related sector where openness and transparency lacks. Open standards are feasibly used as per convenience of government, where they want to stick with regulatory approach in the name of public policy. Internet is costlier with no quality of service and control mechanism. Monopoly rule with giant telecom making big business and government getting a fat royalty supports monopoly. 4G has been introduced, but seems like nobody is interested as 3G. It's very expensive and struggling. People are frustrated with politics and system, and they are pouring their anger over social media, where political leaders strongly believe social media is creating a menace in the society. Asia needs better collaboration and cooperation, where we have to focus. And I don't have the other lines, I'm sorry. No, we don't have the next, so it's cut it. Where we have to focus. Okay. That's from Srideep from Nepal. That's all we have.
Thank you, Srideep, and thank you, Lina. We now have Rajesh. Would you like to make a brief?
While I have already covered all my things into my policy group discussion, but still what I feel that, especially in India, apart from the general literacy, computer and internet literacy is very much required. Another thing what we require for bridging the digital divide between the rural and urban is the handholding into the rural area, where the people who are generally illiterate, but we can make them computer literate by introducing the friendly application, so that they should be able to use the internet in a better way. Government is already doing a lot of investment into the infrastructure. 250,000 villages are going to be connected through the optical fiber. BharatNet is the program. And at the same time, they are trying to make the affordable broadband so that the rural people who are very price sensitive can be able to use. One very, I will not say successful, but at least one revolutionary step has been taken recently by our government of the demonetization and making the whole economy cashless. If this cashless economy is being adopted by the rural people, then automatically we will feel that this penetration into our country will increase in multi-folds, because then all this cashless transaction will happen on the internet only, on the smartphone. And the government, all the department of our government is trying their level best to introduce this cashless thing into the system. And I hope that, very optimistic that this will be a very great success. And if this will be a great success, then the next year when we will meet again into the IGF, I can refer the success story of India at that time.
Thank you, Rajesh. And now we have Arjun for a 3-minute presentation.
Thank you, Satish. I think a lot of what I wanted to cover here has already been said by all our panelists here, the speakers here. But just being from a country, being from India, which represents a significant chunk of the Asian Pacific population, I just wanted to make a few quick observations. So in India, we have a very peculiar scene in terms of digital inclusion, because we have a very high tele-density in India. We have about 81% of people who already are mobile subscribers in India. And if you consider this along with the fact that there is a strong preference for internet access over mobile devices than fixed line connections, it should be the case that a lot of people are already connected to the internet, but the situation that we see on the ground is quite different, in that we have only about 30% people who are actually connected to the internet and who are able to derive the benefits of the internet. So there could be a lot of reasons as to why this is happening. Like poor internet infrastructure, for instance, is one of the prime factors, in the sense that even though we have a very good mobile penetration in the country, when it comes to access to cellular data networks, it's not always the best. If you move to some of the remote locations, and if you move to some of the regions that are not close to the rural areas, the internet connectivity almost always just drops off, and it's very, very difficult to use the internet services in these areas. Then there is also the fact that we have a lot of languages and diversity in India in terms of culture. So localizing content for easy consumption by the people from these regions would be another factor to consider when you're talking about digital inclusion. Social and educational backwardness, all of these are points that were already listed in the session description. So all of these, I think, would offer an excellent glimpse at what are the areas that we need to be looking at. So social and educational backwardness, the level of digital literacy in India is also something that needs to be looked at. We do have certain initiatives that are trying to bridge this gap. The National Digital Literacy Mission, for instance, is actively trying to make more people literate in terms of technology and how to use the internet, and initiatives like this need to be carried on with. Then there are also a clear lack of coherence in terms of policy, in the sense that though we do have some overarching policies that ask for the formulation of a society that is very digitally empowered, which is a knowledge economy, we do have certain other policies coming from certain other regulators which don't always gel very well with this overarching vision, and this causes a certain amount of discrepancies in terms of how these policies are implemented across these sectors. So looking at greater consistency across the policies on digital inclusion would be a very good place to be looking at as well. So yeah, I think that's about it. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Arjun. And for the final 3-minute presentation, I have Gunilla Aspring.
Thank you, Satish. Gunilla Aspring from Australia, Women with Disabilities Australia. I thought rather than talking about a number of different disability issues in the Asia-Pacific region, I would give a little bit of a report back from a session yesterday in the Internet Society Leadership Exchange. There were a lot of different conversations, as in breakout groups, about many different topics, and I facilitated one on accessibility for people with disability. And there was young people who participated from Brazil, Dominican Republic, Canada, Kenya, Armenia, and myself from Australia. So it covered most of the regions of the world, except for Europe, and really there are so many common issues across developed and developing countries when it comes to accessibility for people with disabilities. So we already heard from Anya about education and the need for education to break down cultural barriers, for example, for people with disabilities. I won't go into too much of that. But we also need to think about education from another aspect, and that is IT, university and college courses. That really there are very few courses that cover anything about accessibility, web accessibility, developing accessible software, apps and so forth. So it means when developers come out, they really have not heard about web accessibility, the W3C Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, even though more and more governments are now are stipulating that government websites should be accessible. So there's a real mismatch there. And something needs to occur there. In Australia, we do have an online course that actually has students from across the world because it's quite unique. On a practical level, countries, developing countries, for example, might have telecentres, and those telecentres would be an ideal place for training in ICT for people with disabilities. But the buildings need to be accessible. If a person in a wheelchair can't get in, well, there's not much point. So it's a matter of thinking about steps, putting in ramps if necessary. And just coming back to web accessibility, it's often a fundamental for accessing information for anyone, for people with disabilities, of course. And it goes beyond having guidelines, but looking at the actual implementation and monitoring so that when websites that might initially be accessible are updated, are they going to continue being accessible? So an interesting example is from Vanuatu. I've done some research in Vanuatu, and as an outcome of that, the government launched a right to information web accessibility guidelines, which are totally based on W3C guidelines, but they have relevant advice on planning for accessibility and for web developers in the government, consulting with stakeholders, actively encouraging feedback and acting on that feedback. It's early days. This was only launched in September, but it may help in a small country like Vanuatu, which has a population of 275,000. And then looking at another country in the region, Australia, where there has just recently been a direct text adoption of a European standard on accessibility criteria in ICT public procurement. So that's how governments buy ICT equipment. And governments, as we know, are very, very large purchasers of ICT. And if they can influence the market, that will increase accessibility in products overall. So Australia's been the first country outside the US and Europe to adopt this, and maybe countries like India could consider this in future too. So yes, thank you.
Thanks very much, Gunilla. Now, before I open up, we have Sharon here who would like to.
I'm sorry, yeah. Thank you. My name is Shireen Shalabi. I'm a member of the board of ICANN, and I am from Egypt. I just want to pass on a message because I attended a similar session on Africa with an African minister. And the digital divide that we talk about here is as acute there as it is in Asia. And in fact, they use the sentence, the digital divide is as worse as apartheid. It's causing so much division in the society. And they have the same problem as you have in Asia in terms of educational skill, language, confidence, security, access. Access is a very important thing, cost of devices, energy, electricity. I said no point having a device if you don't have electricity at home, and applications and all of these things. So there are the same issues everywhere, and the digital divide is really splitting the world big time between those that can and those that cannot. And I think a solution has to be found for resolving this issue. So I just wanted to pass the comment that it's very similar also in Africa than in Asia. Thank you.
Thanks, Sharon. We have Rinalia who would like to make a small introduction.
Just a small comment to say that I've been working in the field of ICT for development since 1998. And when I look back during the years when we had WSIS, 2003 to 2005, when we talked about digital divide, I'm surprised that the issues haven't really evolved. And we have new things coming up. Zero rating is something new. We have IDNs that didn't exist before, but the challenges are surprisingly similar. And I personally am really shocked by it. And something definitely needs to be done. Hopefully something concrete will come out of this session, Satish.
Thanks, Rinalia. So the floor is now open. We have a few minutes, maybe 5 minutes for, so we have Anya. Anyone else who would like to raise a question? Yeah, so Anya, please.
I just wanted to respond to Rajesh's point about the demonetization move in India and the attempt to shift society to a cashless economy. I actually personally find that exercise quite worrying. And the reason is because of the harms of digital exclusion that we were talking about earlier, right? We know that large parts of Indian rural economies still function a lot on bartering, and if they don't function on bartering, then they function on the basis of cash. If the infrastructure is not in place, if people don't actually have the resources to access these devices, I think it's quite a dangerous argument to throw people in the deep end, what the government effectively has done, and basically force them to make a shift that they are in no way ready for. It's clear that people will have to kind of shape up. Even if I live in Delhi, and if I see the number of shops in my local market, which has all these small shops still, right? And where I do most of my grocery shopping still, as many people in Delhi do, they've all shifted all of a sudden to online payment systems as well because they had to. But I really don't think, for them, this might have been feasible. For people in rural areas, they might be forced to make the shift, and they might actually adapt. But in the course of that process, there will be enormous costs to be paid by them as well, right? Because what are they doing in the meantime? And so I really think this is not the way to go about this. And I'm quite worried about the long-term implications, especially for more rural economies, of that exercise. I think it could have, I'm not saying it is negative by definition, but this should have been planned very differently. And it's sad to see that didn't happen.
I am Ritu and I'm working with Digital Empowerment Foundation in India. Okay, so I would also like to implicate on the policies which we have been talking about, Indian policies which are positive on the north side. Also that right to raise the question about what is the implementation and effective implementation of such policies. Like the example which we have has been given, that national optic fiber policies which is trying to connect 250,000 villages. However, that when we conducted the research, 67% of the devices are either not working or either not just hanging over in the name of that the devices are there. Okay, so the effective implementation of such policies are yet to be measured as well. And what discourse which is happening in the duration those period is looked at as well.
Thanks very much for that point. Leonid, please.
Thank you. Leonid Todorov. Well, first of all, answering to Rinalia concerns, well, I have a very bad prediction for you. Because the things will be worsening simply because governments become too much conservative these days. whether in the United States or across Asia Pacific or even in Europe. And there will be more attempts like, and I would agree with Anya, more attempts, as Russian communists once said, to bring everyone into the future with the iron fist. But that goes, I mean, that resonates with that primordial nature of the government, which try to be really overprotective and parenting too much their residents. So bad future for the multi-stakeholder model. That's what I would predict. And of course, the digital divide will be widening because of these very badly articulated and even worse implemented policies. And yet another issue, I mean, speaking of these, I mean, of bringing the next billion online, I think that the role of local CCTLDs as focal points of expertise and sound policy shaping is pretty much underestimated. And I would say that that might be in the focus of our attention, at least for for years to come, because especially when it comes to small countries, they are probably the only ones who are non-partisan enough and in the pursuit of genuine public interest. Thank you.
Thank you, Leo, for that very dire prediction. So we are out of time, actually. We started 5 minutes late, so I have another 2 minutes before we close. Are there any final comments from anyone? Not seeing any hands, I will assume that, okay, Anya, one last comment.
Well, I didn't want to hog the floor, but I do think, I think we also partly set ourselves up for failure because the figures we often use aren't right? So, like a lot of the figures, Arjun, that you quoted are actually about connections, even though they are quoted as being about individuals having connection. But of those connections, I alone have 3, right? And many of us in elite areas will. So the actual number of people who have a SIM card or multiple ones is already much lower. And I think that's also really a challenge that governments, especially in the developing part of Asia Pacific, everybody wants to boast about the number of people that have access, the kind of connectivity they have. But actually, the next billion is not having the same internet access as we have. And if they have full access on a smartphone, I think then we can already be happy. In India, the most reliable survey counts a regular internet user as somebody who has access at least once in the past month. That's a very, very minimal metric, right? And I think that's another thing that it doesn't come out enough in these conversations, but actually when we are talking about the growing figures of people who have access, it's a completely different kind of access, and we need to be more ambitious, but to be able to do that, we also have to be honest. That, I guess, as Rinalia is pointing out quite painfully, we haven't been doing enough, even if we are doing our best.
Thank you, Anya. And with that, oh, sorry, didn't see you. One last comment. Can you come over here? No, come here.
Okay, from Hong Kong Baptist University, Yi Chen. I'm a researcher on internet governance. Just, I remember recently there's a movement in terms of the government internet, which internet governance, is about constitutionalism. A lot of people talk about how can we make all this discussion policy binding. So therefore, at the United Nations, they announced this kind of charter of internet rights and principles. So we're talking about to make all this discussion become legally binding or binding into the national law or even the United Nations Charter. Do you think this is a way to move forward, or you just think it's infeasible in the long term? So this is my comment and questions as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now it's really late for us, so we will close at this point. I'd like to thank all the participants, all the speakers, both physically present here and remote, for having organized this, participated in this session. The report will be up on the IGF site shortly. Thanks again.